if you did something bad, they would order in this military style the public beatings of children. And so they would make us all watch. They would drag a kid on stage and then order the parent to strip the kid in front of us and beat the kid in front of us. And I'll never get this image out of my head of this kid getting away from her mother. His clothes are off and she's hitting him all over because he's squirming and it's hard. And he runs to the side of this raise and there's an inner Navy member in a uniform, an adult, that drags him back to his mother and the beating continues.
All right, Jamie. Where'd you grow up? Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Los Angeles. On the day of my birth, I was driven from Westwood Medical Center, a nice part of LA,
yep,
to a slum in downtown Los Angeles, a slum building on the outskirts of downtown LA in the Rampart Police District, where I was turned over to inner Navy members of Scientology. And that is where I would, in that slum office building is where I would spend the next 3 years of my life.
Do you remember any of it?
I actually have baby memories. I can remember, like, basically the first 3 years of my life was little to no human touch. There's no baby pictures of me. And we just sat in cribs in our own sick and our own feces all day, every day, and until we moved to the next tenement. It was a place with peeling paint, roaches, mice. It was just a hellhole.
And this is part of the Scientology
This
church?
was a nursery run by the inner Navy members, the core of Scientology. And one of my caretakers reached out to me about a year and a half ago, and I was able to confirm a lot of these baby memories. And she asked me if I had a particular memory, and I said, like, do you remember how they bathed you? And I said, no. She says, once a week they would line up the babies, 30 to 40 babies with 3 nannies, and they would take off your diaper, dip you in one bath, wipe off everything they could, and hand you to the next nanny who would put a fresh diaper on you. Then, without draining the water, they would put in the next baby. So for the first 3 years of my life, I was bathed weekly by being dipped in feces. And then I went back to sitting in my feces, staring up at the ceiling for 3 years. And my mother would come by periodically. You would think that it couldn't get any worse. It does. At 3 years old, we moved to a building on Melrose, a red brick building with no air conditioning. And it was a militaristic type environment. And I'm stuck into a dorm room with old industrial bunk beds, roaches, mice. And I'm put on the third bunk because I can't fend for myself with 100 and something other kids. I had constant dreams of waking up, falling, and then I would wake up on the floor. We were subject to military type musters. In the morning, they would line us up and make us account like in a military group, like Lord of the Flies. And there was just no one looking out for us. There was no one looking at our bodies. There were several kids that I know that were molested. One of them became someone that wanted to be a molester, and then he took his own life because he didn't want to do that to his wife and his kids. And I always wondered if that had not happened to him, would he have had that compulsion? I'm not apologizing for him, but he wasn't the only kid. So I've lost a lot of these kids that I grew up with to suicide and overdosing, drug overdoses. I've counted something like 5, and I just decided I wanted to stop counting. I had a grandmother that where my mother came from a normal family. And so every few years they would bring me to New York, but no one was looking at my body. And I have to really describe the poverty, how deep this poverty was, the nature of the circumstances. I never learned to brush my teeth. I didn't have underwear. I didn't have bedding. Like, I slept on a congealed, oily mattress with an army blanket, or one of those fluffy, purple polyester blankets. So it was a level of, it was almost like we were being penned. It wasn't like these adults were intentionally trying to hurt us. We just weren't useful, so we were being penned over here and no one was looking at us. And it just so happened the conditions were disgusting. And so no brushing of teeth, I never went to school.
Soft White Underbelly is about giving people a space to tell their stories, even when these stories challenge what we think we know. Ground News shows us different perspectives in the media, which is why Ground News is a perfect sponsor for my channel. In a world where algorithms censor much of the information we receive, some of the most important stories get missed from our news feeds. Ground News highlights local news from around the world, giving you an on-the-ground perspective that national coverage might miss. The app and website empowers you to form your own opinions by presenting you with every article published on any news story worldwide. My favorite part of the app is the data it gives you on each news source as you read it, such as where it leans on the political spectrum, a factuality rating indicating how subjective their printed reporting tends to be, and who funds it. I particularly like their blind spot feed, dedicated to showing you news stories that are underrepresented in the mainstream media. You can check this all out by scanning the QR code on screen or clicking the link below. It's easy to forget how much bias can shape the reality we live in. And in a world where our attention is constantly being fought over, my Vantage Plan easily helps me keep up with more important stories slipping through the cracks. So I encourage you to check them out at ground.news/SWU. Subscribe through my link or download the mobile app and enter promo code SWU to save 40% off their Vantage Plan. And by subscribing or even gifting it to someone you know, you're helping hold the media accountable and helping my channel directly. Thank you for watching.
When I was 4, we went on my grandmother had us come to New York. And as I said, no one looked at my body. She's happy to see her grandson. This is outside of New York City. She sticks me in the tub and her face turns black. I'm 4 years old looking at this woman smiling at me. Her face just goes completely black and she starts screaming for my stepfather. And they threw me in a car and rushed me to the emergency room where I had an infection in my lower extremities that was about to go septic and kill me. 2.5 years later, on the next trip to New York, I was complaining that I couldn't hear, and my mother said I was faking. My grandmother said, let's just go to see our friend who's a pediatrician in the next town. She looked inside my ear, asked for my grandmother, and then I was driven immediately to Manhattan, to New York City, where I underwent emergency surgery, a tonsillectomy, and I had my adenoids taken out. And the doctor, I just will never forget the conversation where the doctor's talking to my mother and my grandmother, telling me that they don't think I'm ever going to hear normally again. And all of this because no one is looking at my body. I remember, and it was just this constant house of horrors. You know, you came downstairs, you never knew if the other kids were going to try to steal your food. There was just no supervision. There was, 3 nannies to all these kids. They called them nannies. I remember one time, and then there was a military structure where they had this thing where the kids were put into like a little military and given a little structure like ROTC for 12-year-olds. I mean, we were 4 through 16. And the older guy who was 16, 17 was arguing with this young blonde kid and trying to order him. He's wearing a naval uniform in Hollywood. And the blonde kid doesn't want to listen, and he's screaming and crying and being defiant. And there's exposed electrical sockets. This building is a tenement of tenements. And he just grabs the kid's arm, the older Navy kid, who's like commander of the young Navy kids, run by Scientology. So it's a Scientology Navy, they call it a religion. And he jams his hand into the electrical socket, and then they're huddled together. They both get electrocuted, and the blonde kid stops crying, and the Navy guy they both just looked at each other like they had enough, and then it was over. And that was kind of the stress of it. We were told that we were not allowed to exhibit emotion. We were told that human emotion reaction was negative. So if we cried or got hurt, we couldn't be emotional. And if something bad happened to us, like we hurt ourselves, we were told that we had done something bad in a previous life or an earlier life, or earlier in this life or a previous life that caused that bad thing to happen to us.
Are these the beliefs of Scientology?
Yeah, they call it pulling something in. So if you do something bad, you'll pull something in. When I was 5 years old, I was brought downstairs and told, of course I wanted to see my mother, and they said, do you want to support what your mother's doing? And I said, yeah. And they had me mark an X. I couldn't write as I wasn't learning to write because I didn't go to school pretty much my entire childhood. And and I signed a 1 billion-year contract, pledging my allegiance to the Commander Hubbard for the next 1 billion years at 5. At 7 years old, just to give you an idea of the type of things that happened in this building on Melrose, 4 blocks from Paramount Studios, right next to Hancock Park, but in a poor Mexican neighborhood right next to Hancock Park. There would be, if you did something bad, they would order in this military style, the public beatings of children. And so they would make us all watch. They would drag a kid on stage and then order the parent to strip the kid in front of us and beat the kid in front of us. And I'll never get this image out of my head of this kid getting away from her mother. His clothes are off and she's hitting him all over because he's squirming and it's hard. And he runs to the side of this raise and there's an inner Navy member in a uniform, an adult, that drags him back to his mother and the beating continues. We were so overwhelmed by it, we laughed. It was like seeing something so unreal. It was the only response we could have at 5 years old. At 7 years old, we moved to they buy this old industrial hospital, which is this big Orwellian blue building that people know in East Hollywood now off of Sunset. It's a massive complex, they call it. And we're moved into a building across the street called The Fountain. I'm not there but a few months when I'm woken up at midnight and dragged from my bed and told that there's an inspection going on, and they take us over to the main building, and I start seeing all these guys in suits, and then I start seeing badges, and they kept us all night, moving us around as these guys were pouring in with suits all around us in the hospital, moving us from one room to the eating area to the stairway. Every time these guys in the suits come in, they would move us. And that went on till 7 a.m. We actually liked it because someone was paying attention to us. I would come to realize later that I was just part of, as a child, the largest FBI raid in U.S. history, based on Scientology infiltrating the U.S. government, the largest domestic infiltration of the U.S. government in its history. They would find evidence that would exonerate a journalist who there was a woman that had survived the Holocaust that wrote a book they didn't like, and then they had framed her for bomb threats, and she'd been indicted. She was about to go to prison, federal prison, for a decade more, and she was exonerated with the evidence they found in that raid. So this was the start of my life. I was taking the bus by myself in Los Angeles by the age of 7. And then they started asking me to do more and more labor. The first labor task was them wrapping me in a hazmat suit. They said they needed a small body to clean out the vents from the old hospital because we just moved in. And they would wrap me in a hazmat suit, and I would take this stuff called royal jelly and spend all day in these massive vents scrubbing them out. Sometimes if they left me alone, at first it was an adventure, and then it was a torture, and I just fell asleep. That task eventually ended, and then I was left alone. And then a few months later, they came over to that building again. Maybe I'm 7, almost 8 years old, and they tell me they need me for another project. They bring me upstairs into the main building across the street, where that big sign is, and they had me putting fiberglass with kitchen gloves into large industrial garbage cans. And I thought it was cotton candy. I had no reference point. I'm between 7.5 and 8.
Still no school.
Still no school. I'm not going to school. I have chronic lice, and just because we're all cramped together, measles, mumps, hepatitis. It's all sweeping through these kid dormitories. It's what I call the lost children of Scientology, the children of their inner clergy. This happened on 4 continents over 50 years, and the story's never really been told. And so I would go back at night where I was alone in this apartment at this point I was sharing an apartment with my parents, and they didn't come home till 11. So I'd get back at 9 or 10, and I would take these scalding hot baths, and that would release the fiberglass from my skin. And I would have it in my throat. And I would do this ritual where I would sit in these baths for 20 minutes. I mean, they were burning baths. And then I would go back and do it again the next day. And again, it started off as an adventure, and then it became a torture. When I was 9 years old, my mother revealed to me in an argument with my brother that the person on my birth certificate was not my father, that they lied on my birth certificate, and that my father had been on the boat with the commander, with Hubbard, and had been cast out, and that my true father could be this evil person out in the world. I learned to look at every single person in the outside world. They have a term for this called wog. A wog is like a muggle, like somebody that is an unenlightened one. So if I came across other people, I was taught that they were asleep and not really awake as human beings. The basic tenets of the belief system is we were taught that we were trillion-year-old beings. We were fallen gods trapped in a meat body, and that Earth was a prison planet. And so part of that doctrine was that we were expected to act as adults. And even at 4 years old, you were expected to act as an adult. Human emotion and reaction was looked at as negative. If you hurt yourself at 5 and a caretaker came over and you were crying, they would say something like, knock off the bank, which means your subconscious mind is affecting you. You didn't really just hurt yourself. And if you were asked to do a task, you were expected to do it as an adult. You're a trillion-year-old fallen god with billions of lives. You just needed to remember. So I was pretty devastated with when my mother told me that that I didn't have a father, and that this character was not necessarily, a good person. It was kind of haunting, and she refused to talk to me about it. And that's, again, back to the trillion-year-old fallen god concept of, you've had billions of lives. You've had billions of children before you. You've probably been your mother's husband, your mother's father. So what is one difficult situation in this life? That's the basic premise. My mother would disappear for long periods of time. She went away to Florida to train how to use this machine where they teach people to counsel. They teach you to help remove people's neuroses by getting rid of their moments where they've had pain or psychic pressure. And it's kind of like this Freudian therapy where you just go over it over and over again and then it goes away. And she was training, and they use a machine to do it, to help you see the things with this little meter that reads, that tells you the things that you can't see. It basically creates false memories. And so she was training to do this, and it takes years to train to do this, and she was training in Florida. So I hadn't seen her in a year, and I'm living in these dormitories. And they came, and one day someone came to get me, and they said, your mom, you're going to see your mother right now across the street. Again, I hadn't seen her in a year, and I was at this point pretty numb. I'd been numb probably since about 4. They brought me to the old industrial hospital, to this big room where there were these card tables, and there were all these people kind of seeing their loved ones, and half the people were dressed in black and the other people were just normal people. My mother came out, she was dressed in black, and she was on a re-education camp where she was forced to do hard labor, run. She was not allowed to walk the entire time she was on it, period. She ate slop and either slept on the roof. exposed to the sun or in the tunnels or in other decrepit circumstances. And you're not allowed to speak unless you're spoken to, even by a child. You have to call everyone sir. And you're doing hard labor, 10 to 15 hours a day, renovation, typically, and then studying the doctrine 5 hours a day. On that, I found out later that you're forced to do a thing called the truth rundown, which is basically you going through something on that machine where until you come to the point where you believe the disagreements that you have with the way they're running things, or what you think you saw that was bad that the high executives did, you believe that you have to come to the point where you believe that it's your own evil that caused you to see what you didn't see. And until you get to that point, you can't graduate. Some people are on this thing 15 years. My little brother, years later, at the age of 16, when I was 23, was put on this in this hard labor camp for having sex with his girlfriend. He would be on it for 7 years. A 16-year-old having sex with his girlfriend. He would be sent to hard labor for 7 years. When I was 12, and again, it's just the poverty conditions are rough. You're dealing with the gang elements of the inner city, and I'm dealing with getting beat up and dealing with those kids and having to navigate addiction and all the things going on in the neighborhood. And, I had chronic head lice, and every few years when my mother they'd make my mother handle it. That would be like a time I'd get to see my mother. It's like, oh, he has lice, it's your problem. So it would be a reason to see my mother if I hadn't seen her for months. And then she would use Quell to kill the lice eggs, and then it would get so bad that it would take hours with a steel comb with my scalp bleeding. And that was just a constant, every year thing. When I was 12, my parents came to me. My mother had a new husband, another stepfather, and and they came to me and they said, in 3 days, we're leaving by train, by secret, to Oregon, and you can't tell anyone. And if you tell anyone, we'll be detained and sent to hard labor. So I kept the secret. And as much as I was going to miss my friends, I was excited to be any place but there. I was there for 2.5 years. We were poor, and it sucked. And I kind of warehoused myself in school and got Fs because I couldn't write. I was, at this point, I'm 12, 13 years old. I don't know how to make a sentence. I don't know how to use punctuation. I don't know how to use a paragraph. And I can't make legible words out of writing. It looked like scratches. So I kind of warehoused myself. I went to middle school and high school, but I warehoused myself and got Fs. So I needed glasses. It was just pure, but it was a time where there was no gun to my head, and it wasn't just a constant psychological, because there's in that movement, getting it done at all costs and using force and pressure and screaming or whatever it takes. Hubbard had a term called a head on a pike. Is how you get people to get things done. So I had this 2.5 years where I'm in this green place up in Oregon, and I'm just allowed to exist. But I was pretty messed up by then. At 2.5 years later, 3 years later, we come back. I get to LA at 16, and my friends are all living on the street. A year earlier, anyone between 14 and 18, 17 had been told you need to either, if you're living in the housing where the inner Navy is, and your parents have signed the billion-year contract, you need to sign the billion-year contract. And if you don't, you need to get out. So you had 14, 15, 16-year-old kids, by dozens of them, living in squalid apartments right next to this big blue building, trying to stay close to their parents. And then getting involved in all sorts of mayhem, drugs, and crime. There was a guy that ran, an Armenian guy. He was not involved. He was a cashier at a market down the street called Hannon's. He had a brand new Corvette, $25,000 of DJ equipment, and I don't know if it was called a GSXR 1100, but a very expensive motorcycle, all brand new. And he was a cashier. And he was running a a criminal enterprise out of Hannon's where they were stealing motorcycles, and he would steal motorcycles for chop shops. And some of the inner Navy kids that were living on, in these squalid apartments were doing it. One of my best friends, I found him living in an abandoned garage on Santa Monica in Edgemont, right in that area. And he was living in the front seat and his friend slept in the back seat. And this is all of us not going to school. We are the lost children, and our story's never been told. And this happened in Sydney, Australia, Southern England, Copenhagen, Johannesburg, Mexico City, and the story is never been told. I'm trying to get my life together. I move out at 16. I'm on my own. I buy a car for $700, a 70s Nova, uninsured, unregistered. And I just don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I just see manual labor coming, and I'm just trying to figure out what to do with my life. They're constantly recruiting me, trying to get me to sign the billion-year contract. I was ignorant. I was illiterate. So at 17 years old, because I have no prospects, I go back in. They send me to Florida, and then they send me all over the world to do work for them. I was in Canada. I was in Copenhagen. I was in England. Fundraising for them for 2 years. And then my last stint was in England, and then I come back to Florida and I'm fundraising for them. And I'm in Central Florida, 19 years old, and I'm wearing a dress white naval uniform, and I'm illiterate, raising money for Scientology. And you're meeting all these brilliant people that come from around the world that do this stuff there, and you're kind of like, God, man, why would this mathematician be here? Why would this lawyer be here? Why would this famous director be here? Why would this famous musician be here if this was all crap? But I was starting to feel like a slave. I was working in an office in Central Florida, working for one of the fundraisers there. Something bad happened in the office, and I was sent to their ship for correction. I was put on a plane to Aruba for correction because our office did something bad. I didn't even know what it was. It was very Orwellian, very Kafkaesque. It was like the trial. And I'm flying into Aruba. All these people are happy. I know something's about to happen to me. I don't know quite what it is, but I know it's not happy. So I'm not happy flying into Aruba. I get there. There's a car waiting for me, drives me to the ship, and I run up this gangplank, and there's a woman waiting for me with a mop and a jumpsuit, and she's screaming at me. And she's one of the innermost senior people on their cruise ship where people do their highest levels. And she screams at me to go in a bathroom and get that effing jumpsuit on. And I run in, I run out, and I start to reach for the mop she's holding for me. She's like, "You don't get the effing mop." And there's a big guy there in a blue boiler suit, and she says, "Take him to the engine room." I'm escorted to this massive engine room in this huge ocean liner. I'm, 19 years old barely, and I'm made to go into the bowels of the engine room and told to clean the bilge, which is a part of the engine that really can't be cleaned. And so there's a huge lip that goes over it, and the engine's constantly emitting oil into it, and I'm told that I got to get the oil out of the lip, which really can't be done. It's a Sisyphean task. So I hadn't slept in 24 hours. So I realized that I'm not going to be cleaning any oil out of this lip. They can't see me under the lip of this massive 2 to 3 story engine that's pounding away. It's so loud. And I just fell asleep for 3 hours. And I wake up to this woman screaming about how, "Where is he? I can't see him. Where is that MFer?" And he's this Australian guy. He says, he's in the bilge under the lip. You can't see him. She's like, "Good, keep him there." At the end of the evening, I'm taken to a dormitory where I'm allowed 6 hours sleep. And the next day I'm brought back to the engine room, and I'm cleaning planks. I'm cleaning oil. I'm just cleaning. I'm scrubbing down this engine room, which can never totally be clean. and they're trying to make it be like a 5-star restaurant or something. And I didn't have glasses, and basically I was told by this Australian guy that I had to get a perfect clean job before I could get out of the engine room. But I didn't have glasses, and this went on for a week. It was so hot in there, and they're running me so hard. After, I don't know if it was a few days or a week, but I collapsed with heat prostration. I'm a kid. They take me off to the infirmary where I spend a few days. I recover. I go back to the engine room. They're frustrated with me. The guy tells me to clean something. He's like, "There's tons of oil on there." He's like, "Jamie, what's your problem? Do you need glasses?" And I say, "Yes. I have a prescription, but like I've just never had glasses except for once." And I lost those that my grandmother bought me. And then the guy said, "Oh my God," he realized that I couldn't see, and then he let me leave. And I went to this place called Potland where I scrubbed pots all day and stared out a porthole in the staff galley. And I was starting to feel like a slave, and I stared out at the ocean and I said, "If they ever try to send me back here, I'm leaving. And I'll never go to the rehabilitation, to the hard labor camp, ever, ever, ever." So I go back to Florida, and I'm working for months and months back doing this job. I'm raising money for them, amounts of money that I can't even conceive because I've never had pennies. And I was able to sell books because I worked for the fundraising side. So I actually did make more money than most staff members, and I squirreled all that money under my bed. I'm back at that office. I don't know how long. Could have been 3 months, could have been 6 months. And something bad happened again. We were up all night, and I did something wrong. And finally, at 6 or 7 in the morning, after calling Australia and England, trying to raise money for them, I'm sent back to my dormitory to sleep at 6 in the morning. 2 hours later, there's a bang on my door, and it's my boss, my boss's boss, and he's saying that I screwed up again, and I'm going back to this ship, and I'm allowed to go back and sleep at 6 in the morning. 2 hours later, my boss's boss bangs on the door and tells me that my plane leaves in 2.5 hours, and he'll be back in 45 minutes to an hour to take me to the airport to go back to the ship, the Free Winds, their cruise liner, where people do their highest levels of spiritual freedom, for correction. I'd made myself that promise that day in Potland, and I wasn't going back. I took everything I owned. I was sleeping in my clothes. I mean, it was not often. It wasn't unusual to average 20 to 21 hour days, all through that time and parts of my childhood if they wanted to get something done. I realize I have 45 minutes to an hour. I take everything I own. I have a few pairs of pants and shirts and underwear and socks that are not naval uniforms, and I throw them into the middle of a sheet. I have a small stereo and some CDs. It's everything I own in the world. I spin the sheet into a bindle, throw it over my back, and go to the laundry room. And I want people to think that I'm doing my laundry. Because where we stayed, another hovel, was a couple miles. I mean, I don't remember exactly, from the downtown Clearwater, Florida, where they did everything, where all the buildings they own are. They've kind of taken over downtown Clearwater, Florida. There were cabs there that would sometimes, in case a staff member was desperate to get back. So I just made people look like I was doing my laundry, kind of timed a cab. And when I thought nobody was watching, I sprinted with my bindle and got into a cab. And I screamed, "Take me to downtown Tampa, go." I knew they would track the cab. They have protocols for this. They would track the taxi. This guy took me to downtown Tampa. I changed taxis 3 times so they wouldn't be able to track me. And then in the 4th cab, I had the guy drop me off at a hotel, a place where there were hotels. I walked into a Radisson. I had some money squirreled away under my mattress. because I worked in the fundraising part, so I could sell things where you could get small commissions. And I asked this woman if I needed to say my name because I knew they'd be tracking me. She said, and if I could pay cash. She said, if you have ID, we don't care what name you use, and yes, you can pay cash. I said, so I could be Mickey, and she said, she said, you can be Mickey Mouse if you want. And I said, okay, Mickey it is. And I paid for 2 nights and went to a room where I slept for, I don't know, 14 to 16 hours. Woke up late at night or late evening. It was dark. I had lost complete sense of time. And I called my grandmother in New York, who had told me when I was 16, when we were going back from Oregon to LA, that if I was willing to face my illiteracy, I could stay at her house, but I would have to be facing my illiteracy every day. And I just couldn't do it. It's hard to explain. I could read at a high level because you're studying the doctrine, but I couldn't write. But at this point, I had no place to go. I was desperate. A lot of the kids in my situation, they wouldn't have that person to call. So they wouldn't. So for me, it really could have been another story. I go to stay with my grandmother, and I instantly enroll in community college where I'm doing remedial classes, trying to understand how to write. It's hard. I'm going to every tutoring class they have. I remember there was one time where I'm sitting in the room and my grandmother spent 45 minutes, I'm 19 years old, telling me, trying to explain to me how to use a comma. But I'll tell you but I felt relieved. I felt relieved because I wasn't wearing a naval uniform in Central Florida. One thing I left out that I'll never forget is the feeling I felt when I took off those naval whites in the Radisson room and I put them in a trash bag with the shoes, the white naval shoes that been digging into my ankles for years, and I dropped it in the trash chute. It was like 1,000-pound weight had been lifted off of me. I started doing these remedial classes, and I tried really hard, and I got better grades because they just saw me trying so hard. So even though I was illiterate, I was kind of surviving, and my grandmother was helping me with the papers. And then I heard about a private school about 40 minutes from my grandmother's house that was taking kids from rough backgrounds. And I applied there, and they let me in with no SATs and no high school diploma, with a bunch of letters saying how I had grown up. And I couldn't write. And I met a girlfriend, and this girlfriend, I met a girl, she saw that I had a literacy problem, and she transcribed my papers. I gave them to her verbally because I could read. And then over the next year, she had me start to write my papers and corrected them and corrected my writing and corrected my grammar. And 6 months after I was transcribing my papers, she was letting me write them and then rewriting them. And then she was having me write them and watching me. And that went on for a year. And then I could barely write. And I heard about, I got really into economics, and I'd heard about, and I was doing really well in these economics classes because it was just these graphs and you didn't have to have a lot of background. And for some reason, I just understood it. And because it didn't require writing. And the professor in that class came to me and he said, James, you're getting 80% of my exams. And I said, thank you. And he said, well, I think you know this 100%, but I think you have a little bit of a literacy problem. And I said, yeah. And he said, why don't you come to my office and give the exams verbally and let's see if you do better. I think you'll get a 90 to 100%. So I did really well, and he sponsored me and rallied he had become the vice president of the college in the year that I went there, and the chairman of the economics department. And he sponsored me to spend a year abroad at this very, very elite institution that I could never get into, but I might be able to get into the year abroad program. And he rallied everyone, got the president, the dean to write a letter, write letters. I was able to kind of prop up my GPA through the help of this woman in transcribing the papers. And I almost had it, and I got this application in and almost had it was the closest I ever came to a nervous breakdown because I was working so hard to apply for something. I was illiterate. I'd never seen the world. And I was like, why am I doing this? I left the dorm, went to my grandmother's house, and I slept for 2 days, just depressed that I was going to do something that I could never that was going to be fruitless. 6 weeks later, I got into this 1-year program at the London School of Economics, which is one of the most rarefied universities in the world. I'm only going to go there for a year. Mostly you're seeing guys from Columbia and the better schools, but they let in a few kids from smaller schools, and this school called Manhattanville College at the time, they rallied behind me and they helped me. And I got in there, and it was really hard, and I thought, what am I doing here? They're going to kick me out when they find out that I shouldn't be here. And I was taking all these statistics and math, econometrics and statistics classes that I couldn't pass because I had no foundation. And I sat at the front copiously taking notes, and a professor pulled me aside after class one day in qualitative economics, economic history. And he said, and he thought that I was sitting at the front of the class and paying attention because I was into it. And he liked the fact that I was an American that was into it. But I wasn't into it. I was effing desperate. And so he said, you really look like you belong here. And if you got sponsored by a teacher, you could be on academic probation. If you do well, you could stay here. And I said, I don't have anyone to help me do that. I don't have a sponsor. And this guy, his name was Gareth Austin. He's a professor at Cambridge now. He said, I'm offering, dummy. So they put me on this academic probation. And I had to drop all the hard classes because now I had to go into his department. And so I was doing mostly economic history, qualitative economics, and which is reading and writing. So I just had to work 10 times as hard, and I did it. I met their B average, the equivalent of a B average academic requirements, and I got invited back to go back to the London School of Economics to see if I could graduate. And it was pretty brutal. I would have to start studying for exams 3 months before the other kids. I would get desperately sick. It was just pressure. But I was used to pressure. My first year in the dorms, I found out that the Scientology in London was only less than a mile away on Tottenham Court Road, so I had to pass it all the time. I was probably in the dorm 6 months when a fax came through saying that because I had left the movement and I'd done all these courses while I was in the movement, I owed them money. And so I owed them $90,000 for the courses that I did while I was illiterate as a kid. And even to keep them from declaring me an evil person when I was staying with my grandmother when I first escaped, for a couple months I had to go into Times Square to their organization there and do interrogations on their machine, which can tell, it's 1/3 of a lie detector, so it can kind of tell if you're lying. And I was interrogated, and if I didn't do those interrogations, that I would be declared an evil person and I would never have any contact with any one of my friends or my family again.
Were you going to church at least?
What's that?
Were you going to church like on Sundays or something?
No. I went into the Scientology Center in Times Square in New York, but I wasn't going.
But this whole time that you've been going through all this training or whatever you call it, were you going to church?
It's not really a church. You do courses on everything from how to study to ethic, to how to be ethical, to how to use that machine to counsel people to save the world, right? It's not, I mean, it wasn't a religious experience for me. Let's just say that it wasn't a religious experience for me. It was a deprivation chamber, a torture chamber that lasted 19 years of pressure. I mean, there was a time when I was 11 where I was hanging out in the inner city and I was scaling a fence and I fell off the other side of the fence. It was a 9-foot drop into some ivy and I was falling face down and I bounced off the ivy and onto my back, and this broken sprinkler, a spike, was sticking out of it that I couldn't see. It hit my tooth and my tooth saved my life, but it broke my tooth in two. This was about 2 years before we went to Oregon. And I just had a broken tooth, which I wore like a scarlet letter of a horrible person for a year and a half, an exposed nerve. I mean, these kinds of things were just constant. And when you have something like that, they don't look at you like, hey, sympathy is one of the worst things you can have in that group. So they don't look at you like, hey, this bad thing happened to that person. They look at you like only something bad happens to you if you did something bad, either earlier in your life or in a previous life. You pulled it in. Everything bad that happens to you, and I was programmed with this from 4. you caused to happen to you, right? So this was it's just a constant pressure. It's kind of hard to describe, really. If I hadn't gone numb, I probably wouldn't have survived it. And I don't take much pride in surviving it, because so many of the kids that I was in that red brick building with have either taken their own life or had drug overdoses. So it's intense. Then I kind of was ashamed of it, and I hid it for most of my life up until about 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, even then, like when I decided to write a book on this 2.5 years ago, no one knew. My publishers didn't know. I became a writer. Believe it or not, of all the things, I became a writer and a pretty successful art director and fine artist that works with some of the biggest brands in the world. And I'm really good at it. And one of the reasons I never wanted to tell the story is I didn't want this story to define me. I didn't want people to know. I didn't want people to look at my art and look at my work through this lens of a person that had been through this thing, this weird love boat, sci-fi torture. I just didn't want that to be how people saw me.
Is it a cult?
I don't like to use that word, cult, because it doesn't describe what goes on in there. When my brother was on that hard labor camp, they made him do this thing called this rundown, this kind of counseling on the machine, where he has to basically come to the conclusion that what he thought he saw that was bad in the way that the group was being run, I won't call it a church either, unless he admits that it comes from his own evil based on, this lifetime, other lifetimes, and that what he saw he didn't see, or was what he was critical about came from his own evil, he couldn't graduate. Now, I don't know about brainwashing and mind control, but that is done, it's exclusive, I believe, to the rehabilitation program. Anybody that grew up in the movement that says I'm wrong, I apologize. But if that's not mind control, I don't know what is. They found me when I was in London and sent me a bill for $90,000. So I was just terrified. I was like dealing with my illiteracy, dealing with this school, terrified. I graduated from the effing London School of Economics. That's up there with Harvard, Yale, Cambridge, and Oxford. And where heads of state and prime ministers go. And so it was quite a turnaround. And to go from illiteracy to that in 5 years I feel like I did things to my body in what I put it through with the 20 hours a day of studying, 15 hours a day of studying, reading till my eyes bled, that my body has never recovered from that 5 years of trying to recover not being educated my whole childhood. And now I write books. During COVID, I got diagnosed. I finally got therapy. We're kind of taught, we're programmed that therapy is really bad and evil, and that psychologists and psychiatrists are evil, so you don't pursue mental health. I got diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress, found out about a physical disorder or a physical injury that is fight or flight, and then ended up writing a book on that with the founder of this thing that resets your nervous system. That reset of my nervous system, which I did during COVID, completely transformed my life and took all the physical triggers. I was just constantly hypervigilant, hyper-aroused, reactive, just every extreme. I didn't have ideation, but I was probably, you could be violent. The extreme flight is ideation, extreme fight is homicide or violence, and I was programmed with that. And and then I heard about this physiological reset of the nervous system, and I went and I did this thing, and it completely transformed my life. It took all the physical triggers, all this physical weight that was just overwhelming my body, and it was gone.
What's it called?
It's called the dual sympathetic reset, or the stellate ganglion block. I was so blown away by it, and then I found out it was only being used by the military and a few like first responders and sexual assault victims. I couldn't believe everyone in the world didn't know about this thing. and I ended up writing a book with the guy that discovered it called The Invisible Machine. That led to, and then also in COVID, I wrote a graphic novel about my life that I illustrated with a genius woman artist in southern Italy, and that I thought would never sell. But it was a sci-fi version, a sci-fi version of a future adjacent Los Angeles version of my life. It's my life story told as a graphic novel, sci-fi graphic novel. And I thought it would never sell. So it just kind of went on the shelf. And then 2.5 years ago, I agreed to tell the story of my life. And I wrote a book called Child X, Poverty, Slavery, Celebrity, and Scientology. And where I explore the existential effects. There's been lots of books about this subject. I say, what does this do to you? What does it do to this is what they say it is. This is what I think it is. And I could be wrong. So I have this, while I was writing Child X, my agent sold my graphic novel. So now I have these two stories of my life, one which is a sci-fi fictionalized version of my life, but everything in it happened except for the magic. And then the true story of my life. So these books are talking to each other. Child X and Hybrid, they come out 2 months apart. Hybrid comes out on July 29th. If you want to support me and if you want to help expose what happened to these kids, the thousands of kids that, like me on 4 continents over 40, 50 years, you can pre-order Child X. Please pre-order Child X. I really want this story told. And my graphic novel, Hybrid, is out there too. Hybred. And then, I have just been on this incredible healing journey. So I just want to plug what saved my life, which was the stellate ganglion block. And I've been on this healing journey with this guy in Portland now, Dr. Ryan Wood at Northwest Regen, on resetting my nervous system with these injections. And it's just completely transformed my life. And it's done that for tens and tens of thousands of military personnel, sexual assault victims, first responders. And now there's clinics popping up all over the world. And there's peer-reviewed papers. It was endorsed by Obama's back as far as 2008. And I was so blown away by how it transformed my life I ended up writing a book with the guy that discovered it, just to bring it to the living room. Because you can get an overactive sympathetic nervous system and hypervigilance, hyperarousal, reactivity, ideation, lack of sleep, all these things. You can get that from having a distant father, having a distant mother. So I wanted to use my trauma, or, that word is overused these days, I guess, but what I'd been through to, bring healing to other people. I just thought that would be the ultimate revenge. And this guy, Dr. Ryan Wood, he teaches this all over the world. He's done more of these. He's one of the top 3 to 4 people in the world. He's done thousands of these things on people. And I send people there, and I see him transforming people's lives every day. And I just feel really blessed. And so I guess to end, Mark, and then you could ask me some questions. All I ask is I have 2 things that I want from doing this interview. One is the story of the lost children of the Inner Navy of Scientology, that has been occurring for 40 years, to be known. We carry so much shame. We don't go out and tell our stories. And by the time we do, we're 40 and we're raging. Or we can't do it because we carry so much shame. I want that story to know that it was systematically, these kids were systematically destroyed over 40 years on 4 continents, all with the same doctrine of you're pulling it in. You can't be emotional. You're a trillion-year-old fallen god. Act like an adult. I don't care if you're 4. All of, doing drills where we're trained to not react, that take away our empathy. And so I want 2 things. I want that story to be told. I do not want it to go on that the story of what happened to these Inner Navy kids does not get told. And I want people, and then the biggest thing is, the reason I was never going to do this, especially something like this, because of how raw it is, telling everything in one sitting. It's one thing over a book, right? And then I'm not telling everything, I'm telling a fraction. But I want, if you want to support me, yes, please pre-order Child X. Support this story. But see me as what I am. Don't see me as what happened to me. See me as an artist. See me as somebody, don't see me as a survivor. See me as a casualty that sought healing, that has gotten really, really good at what he does. Check me out. Check me out on Instagram. Check out my website. And see me as an artist, an art director, and a creator, and a writer. And so it's ultimately a story of triumph. The one thing I couldn't do as an adult male, which is write, I've now have, as of the fall, I'll have 5 books with major publishers. And I have a deal pending that I should have a 6th book by. That's something that's sitting around, already partly done, that could be coming out as early. It's being fast-tracked as early as the spring. So 6 books by next year.
That's great.
So yeah, so it's ultimately a story of triumph, and that where you come from does not define what you become.
Do you know other people who have been through the Scientology system that you just described that are either still in it or out of it?
Tons. Yeah.
And
most of them end up doing manual labor. If they're really successful, they end up as contractors. They're impoverished by their lack of education. So they don't have a lot of choices in what they can do. The lucky ones become successful contractors.
Why do they not educate?
Because you don't have to learn anything but the doctrine. We have this brief chance in history to save the world. That's what Hubbard said, the commander. And unless we do it now, the world. Literally, they would say, you're not going to have anything to use your education for if there's a nuclear fire and the world is consumed by nuclear explosions or nuclear war. So you might as well dedicate your life to keeping that from happening and salvaging the planet.
It's an interesting religion.
I wouldn't call it a religion. It wasn't a religious experience for me, as I said. So some of the kids, the majority of them, like I said, I've lost so many friends. I feel like I'm a casualty of war, and that I survived combat. Some of the kids, though, you learn to work. So some of these kids learn a skill. Like every once in a while, a kid will learn like programming, and then he'll get out, no high school education, and he'll become massively successful in tech because he's got a work ethic and he or she had this gift in programming. I know a guy that became a famous lighting designer working on some of the biggest movies in the world because he learned lighting in there. Those stories are the minority. My story is the minority. The majority is, you spend your whole life not being educated, being raised with a doctrine where you're bad, and having shame injected into you in a systematic and mechanical way. Most people do not recover from that. And we're the walking dead.
All right, Jamie, thank you so much for sharing your stories on Scientology.
Thank you.
Very fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. When I was designing the first Soft White Underbelly book, I realized that there were so many great portraits that weren't going to make it into that book. They just wouldn't fit. And once I saw how well that first book sold, I knew I'd have to design a second book. This second book is finally ready to ship. Like the first one, this book has a collection of some of the best portraits from Soft White Underbelly, accompanied by a quote from that person's interview. This book features another group of Rebecca portraits, as well as a collection of color images of the Whitaker family, and plenty of others. You can order yours for $125 or $150 for a signed copy at softwhiteunderbelly.org. Again, like the first book, once this book is sold out, I will not be printing more of them. The portraits are what Soft White Underbelly is all about, and these 2 books contain the best of all that work. Thank you for watching.